Madame Corbeil.
Oui, alors nous allons procéder donc à la lecture des questions qui ont été reçues par Internet, comme on le fait depuis le début du confinement. Donc, la première question nous vient de Madame Christina Esposito. Can you please reconsider installing the boards for outdoor hockey rinks in Pierrefonds-Roxboro parks as in previous years? Our neighboring West Island boroughs have done so, but are limiting it to their residents, asking for ID. Therefore, leaving our hockey players with nowhere to go play their favorite sport. Please, the teenagers really need this. Dedicated ice surfaces with boards and nets for hockey only. The free skating already have surface that can be adjacent to hockey ones. Without it, it's just video games, YouTube, and Netflix. Please, my 16-year-old son is graduating high school this year. Pierrefonds hockey canceled, school hockey canceled, soccer canceled, all grad activities canceled, prom likely canceled. This would mean so much to him. All he wants to do is play hockey or on an ODR. Teens are isolated in their homes and it's heartbreaking. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Esposito, for your question. I hope you and your family are well, particularly during these very difficult and trying times. I had the pleasure, Mrs. Esposito, of speaking to you, I believe, last week, where we discussed this issue regarding the hockey boards and the difficult decision that we had to take as an administration here in Pierrefonds-Roxboro, not to install our hockey boards throughout our territory. We're very fortunate in Pierrefonds-Roxboro to have not only our nature parks, but almost 70 parks and green spaces that are at your disposal to use for all sorts of activities, not only in the winter, but also throughout the year. We made a conscious decision to not put up the hockey boards, anticipating some of the difficult decisions that the government would have to tell us or give to us directives that would not allow us to have hockey on these boards. If you remember, a while back, all the parks were closed in March. No one had access to any of these facilities during the summer, or at least during the part of the spring, before some clear directives could be put in place. The winter, when the boards were going up throughout every territory, we anticipated that that would be a difficulty, particularly because the numbers of COVID cases were climbing, not only in Pierrefonds-Roxboro, but throughout the world. So we made a very difficult decision, understanding the importance of sports to the body and mind, that we had to close these facilities and at least offer skating and skating only with no hockey. Then the government came with a directive of 8 people on the ice at a time, which was extremely difficult to manage, as we saw in neighboring communities and in communities throughout Canada. Managing this type of installation for a minimal amount of people for a limited amount of time logistically became almost impossible. And then last week, we heard with the government decree that all hockey and only individual sports like skating would be allowed on these surfaces. So in hindsight, although it was a very difficult decision for us, a decision that we struggled with, knowing the importance of sports and knowing what we've done as a community for sports infrastructure in general in Pierrefonds-Roxboro, we knew that it was going to be a terrible blow for some families that relied on it day in and day out. But in hindsight, we believe we made the right decision, knowing now for the next 4 weeks that this is not accessible. And having spoken to other mayors, it is extremely difficult to be managed in the current state. And so I urge you and your teenage children to go and participate in other sports and activities. And this way, hopefully, they will benefit. And as I have kids, and many of us have kids, we try to encourage them to do other physical activity when the activity that they do isn't always available. I thank you very much for your question. As I promised you when we spoke, I will come and visit you when we are over all of this, and we will discuss some of the other issues that you had in mind as well regarding some of our parks and play spaces. Thank you very much.
Monsieur Trevor Thompson, when will you put a speed bump at the intersection on the corner of Rue Rosemary and Gouin? There have been multiple instances of near collisions and general chaos due to the masses of people visiting the Cap Saint-Jacques Park since the pandemic, none of which seem to follow the posted speed limit or notice the stop sign on our corner. Having police paid to sit at our corner most of the summer to enforce parking rules seems a complete waste of taxpayer money. Police are not supposed to be using their time to be parking lots attendant for the park. They should be policing our neighborhoods, not sitting in a running, idling car all day, as was the case this past summer. There are cadets or private entities to handle traffic and parking issues, and a simple speed bump could reduce the chances of residents on our street being injured.
Mr. Thompson, thank you very much for your question. I hope you and your family are well as well. Although I agree with you with the resources of our SPVM being better utilized elsewhere on our territory and not necessarily parked days at a time at an intersection, I have to tell you that this was a unique experience that we had early in the spring, and the reason was because we were overwhelmed in the Cap Saint-Jacques Park, of course with the pandemic and the limited access to other facilities. There was an influx of citizens coming from all over the territory, Montreal included, that were utilizing this park and was spilling over into the neighborhood areas, causing issues of parking, causing issues of speeding, causing issues of people having, for example, barbecues on private lawns and so on and so forth. We intervened on behalf of the borough with our Montréal Grand Parc, who managed that facility, and we demanded that they implement some type of system to be able to correct the situation that our neighborhood residents were dealing with. We also communicated with our SPVM, which deployed agents on the territory, and I know this firsthand because they were stationed there, as you mentioned in your question, days at a time, to make sure that there was a presence to allow folks that were using that park and were not respecting not only the speed limit, but also the stop signs, the 3 stop signs on roads, because it is an intersection. There's stop signs at the 3 intersections. And in fact, you're right, there were folks that were coasting and continuously coast through that zone. The police were there to make it known that you can't do that. We've looked at other situations there in terms of parking. We know that on Gouin, there are visible signs throughout the area to advise the public that they can't park in that area. And we also made sure that we looked at least temporary measures to have people not park not only on Rose, but some of the other adjacent streets off of Gouin, neighboring Cap Saint-Jacques. And we did this successfully, or relatively successfully, I have to say, under the circumstances, to be able to find that solution. We know that Gouin, at that part of the borough, is an arterial road, which means that it is shared not only by the vehicles, it is also a shared bikeway, of course, for the cyclists that ride down that sector of Gouin, and it is also a bus route. And the recommendation, it's not the law, but the recommendation by the Minister of Transport is when you have these factors that you have to consider, that they recommend that you don't put a speed bump in these areas. But regardless of that, that's not the reason there's no speed bump there. We're also looking at other ways of curbing and traffic curbing measures, such as freestanding markers, improving the signage. And we're looking into this to make sure that as we move forward into this year, what are some of the measures we can put in place rather than having a police officer there continuously to make sure that we correct a little bit the situation of what's going on there. Studies have also shown that whenever there is a speed bump, they may slow down for the speed bump, but they will increase their speed as they pass that speed bump for the next 100 meters or whatever is available to them. And so I'm not giving excuses here of why there isn't a speed bump. All your points are well made, and I agree with most of them. And we will look at, with our traffic committee, again, the situation at that intersection to see not only at that intersection, but all the way down to Pilon, that stretch on Gouin, to see what are things that we can do in that area to make it safer for the citizens, not only that use it every day, but also the ones that visit it from time to time, and for the residents that live there. So thank you very much for your question, and we will make sure that we will address this. And Mr. Gignac chairs that committee, and he knows of it very well. We have two councillors as well that live in the immediate area, and they know of it very well as well, Mr. Langevin, Madame Talbot, who live in that area immediately, and so they know it too. And so collectively as a council and administration, we'll look at ways in finding some concrete solutions to be able to at least resolve some of the issues that you live with day in and day out. Thank you very much, and I hope you're well.
Mrs. Irina Klosiko. Hello, I am wondering why there is no outdoor skating rinks anywhere in Pierrefonds. Children are missing hockey so much. Second question, is Pierrefonds planning to have its own arena? Last hockey season, our kids didn't have enough time provided at Sportplex, plus our hockey fees are the highest from all the boroughs because Pierrefonds doesn't have its own arena.
Thank you very much, Madame Klosiko. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that properly, and I apologize if it's mispronounced. In fact, I answered the question regarding our outdoor rinks of why we chose as an administration not to install our outdoor rinks. And now, as I mentioned earlier, in hindsight, I believe that we made the right decision, knowing that the decree has come down from the government, not allowing us to practice this sport outdoors. However, there are other activities that are available, and I encourage you to do that. The fact that the borough does not have their own indoor arena is not really the issue of the rates being higher that they may be somewhere else. You have to take into consideration many factors here. Yes, it is a private arena, and the hours are designated to the different organizations that the ice sports, if you will. They have a regular meeting and regular meetings with our services to outline their needs throughout the year, to make sure that we can provide for them the hours that they need for the amount of players and so on that they have within their respective sports. And we do this successfully with the organizations. Certainly, there may be other hours that may be available, and that becomes the responsibility of the teams, the individual teams and the associations to pay those rates additionally from the ones that we subsidize as a borough. When you look at an arena that is owned by a city, and I know this firsthand because we were managing all that when I was in my professional world working in Dollard. So I know that the indirect cost to the citizens of a community when you own such an establishment or such an infrastructure is quite elevated. And so that amount is also passed to the residents indirectly. It's not because that hourly rate may be reduced that the resident in the long run isn't paying for it. They are. The idea of us not having an arena, I can't turn back the clock. I can't tell you why the city at that time did not decide once the old Pierrefonds Arena, if you were in Pierrefonds at the time, we used to have a Pierrefonds Arena that was just beside our city hall here. When that was demolished many, many years ago, the idea to build a new one, why that wasn't done by the council at the time, was probably for many reasons. But at the same time, we also have an infrastructure here at the borough that has 4 ice surfaces, that is a private entity that we support, and we are actually the prioritized, if you will, and primary clients of this institution. And so we make sure that everything being equal, that we can provide at least the best hours for our organizations and not limit the arena from renting the other hours to the private sector, if you will. And there are many hours that we rent, and I would urge you to discuss this with your local organization to see the hours that they were allocated for the use of the ice activities that they have. And the second thing I wanted to also say is there is no plans to build an arena in Pierrefonds. All we can continue to do is when we renegotiate our contracts with the private arena is to not only try to reduce the rate if possible, but also to get better hours, if you will, to accommodate the players and the families that use it on a regular basis. And the other thing, when I do a comparison of the different rates offered by the different communities for the rinks, yes, in fact, there are higher rates in Pierrefonds, but when you look at some of the other communities that I have in front of me here, and I'd be happy to call you to discuss this further, there are rates that are quite significantly high as well elsewhere throughout Montreal. Again, I'm not making an excuse or justifying, I'm just trying to give you some of the factual reasoning why it is what it is in Pierrefonds. So I thank you very much for your question. I would be happy to discuss this further with you, and I would be happy also to connect you with our services, our recreation sports services that could give you some clearer direction in terms of why it is this way in Pierrefonds-Roxboro. Thank you.
Mrs. Martha Bond, my question concerns item 40.01 on page 2, notice of motion for a residential housing project mixed with commercial to replace Camille Floris on Pierrefonds Boulevard. First question, the 100-year flood zone shown on the map and avoided by the building footprint comes with reference and date. In other words, is the area modified in consequences of the recent flooding 2017 and 2019? Why is there no more link to the project PowerPoint presentation documents earlier made public online, early December 2020? How is it that 8 stories is permitted on that lot size? Did adjacent resident and businesses owners receive notification of the proposed project and their rights to submit comments? Did the committee or borough council, modify the project after receiving comments? Why or why not?
Thank you, Mrs. Bond, for the question. And again, I hope you are well as well with your family during these very difficult times. You've asked a series of questions in your question here, and so I'm going to go one by one to try to answer as best I can. And if there is something missing, some element missing from my answer, as you know, you can always contact our services as you've done historically for many years, and we would be happy to give you any supplemental information you may need. The 100-year flood zone shown on the map and avoided by the building footprint comes which the reference that you said, the positioning of the floodplain line, which is the RCI, the Règlement de Contrôle Intérimaire, which comes from the Communauté Métropolitaine de Montréal, and the Zone d'Intervention Spéciale, the famous ZIS line that we've talked about for quite some time, were located by a land surveyor in reference to the CMM plan dated the 20th of June, 2019, and to the latest ZIS revised plan dated December 30th, 2019. Your question regarding the presentation. The PowerPoint document was posted online as a result of our written public consultation procedure, as you know, in December 2020, as a replacement to our live Planning Advisory Committee meeting. A similar document will be posted as a result of our written public consultation for the zoning modification. The written public consultation is required in virtue of our provincial act respecting land use and development. You asked about how is the 8 stories permitted on such a lot size. The project was initially proposed on 10 stories and brought down to 8 stories as a result of our Planning Advisory Committee recommendations. This zoning change is intended to make the 8-story multi-residential project viable on the site. Of course, sitting requirements such as setbacks, parking ratio, and others, for example, will ultimately be confirmed once this zoning change is adopted. You asked a question about adjacent residents and businesses. Did they receive notification? The surrounding neighborhood was informed through our written public consultation held on at our December 2020 Planning Advisory Committee. A public notice will be posted online informing residents of a written public consultation for this zoning change and inviting them to submit questions in regards to the project. Ultimately, the project in its final form will be presented in public for its architectural design approval, which is the PIA as you know it. And then your last question was, did the committee or borough council modify the project after receiving comments? Why or why not? The initial project, this goes back now to approximately 2 years, was presented with a specific architectural design and was to be authorized under the PPCMOI, Project Particulier Bylaw. as you know as well, having assisted these meetings in the past. The project has evolved through these 2 last years, and the building design will undoubtedly evolve further following the zoning change approval. And the present architectural design is presented as an example of what could be built on the site and shall not exceed 8 stories. So as you know, historically, when these types of projects, major projects, we have that series of steps that are taking throughout the project evolution. And only when we get to that final stage, of course, as we are in the planning stages now for this, will you see a final version of what it could look like. Now, these are just for presentation purposes, but all of this is subject to any changes that are imposed on any project that is to go not only there, but in any area of the borough. Thank you, Mrs. Bond, for your question. Again, I hope you're well.
La dernière question nous vient de M. James Bond. Concerning zone change subject to a register, example item 40.0, please explain in simple terms in English and in French how the register procedure will legally take place to enable eligible voters to participate during curfew and other restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. And will the public notices clearly explain these procedures? And what is the time frame for when the request to open a register will be?
Thank you very much, Mr. Bond, for your question, and I hope you are well as well. Happy New Year to you and your family. In the event of the opening of a register, it will take place within a remotely registration process of qualified voters, and signatures would be received by email or mail. The procedure will be clearly explained in the public notice, as we've done since this whole pandemic started, specifically the pandemic, because the procedures have changed and we've had to become innovative and proactive in our approach to try to get public participating in these types of procedures. The delay to receive signatures will be 15 days instead of 1 or 2 days as usual. So we understand the difficulties that folks may have in trying to give us that information or questions or interventions, and the limit of 1 to 2 days doing virtually being difficult. We have decided that 15 days would replace the 1 or 2 days, which is usually the case. And the time frame to request the opening of a register is indicated in the corresponding public notice. Madame Corbeil, je ne sais pas si vous voulez expliquer ça en français parce que c'est technique et je veux pas faire une erreur au niveau de la description et comment on va procéder dans ce dossier.
Oui, donc en fait, depuis le début de la situation de pandémie, les procédures impliquant le déplacement de personnes sont interdites. Donc, au niveau des demandes de registre, au lieu de recevoir des pétitions, donc obligeant les gens à faire du porte-à-porte, on reçoit maintenant, on peut recevoir des demandes individuelles pourvu que le nombre totalise ce qui est prévu par les règlements. Donc, les demandes peuvent se faire de façon écrite, par courriel ou par la poste, de façon individuelle. Également, pour la tenue d'un registre, s'il y avait lieu de tenir un registre, le registre se ferait de façon virtuelle, donc publié de façon électronique, et les gens intéressés à signer le registre le feraient de nouveau de façon électronique, soit par signature électronique, courriel ou par la poste. Évidemment, les mécanismes prévoiront la façon pour les gens de s'identifier comme étant bel et bien des personnes autorisées des zones concernées. Donc, les procédures sont adaptées à la nouvelle situation et évidemment, les avis publics décrivent dans chaque cas de façon claire la façon de procéder.
Merci, Madame Corbeil. Ça met fin à la période des questions des citoyens.